one after the other over a period of about 7 months, I think.
Brian Connolly was the kind of performer people couldn't look away from. When he stepped under stage lights, the room seemed to tilt toward him. The guitars sounded sharper. The crowd felt closer. His voice carried a dangerous sweetness, playful on the surface but powerful underneath, able to soar above crashing drums without forcing itself. In the early 1970s, when glam rock ruled the airwaves, Brian didn't just sing songs, he sold a dream. Gold hair catching the light, a confident swagger, a grin that suggested everything came easily. To millions of fans, he looked like proof that fantasy could become real. That if you wanted something badly enough, the world would eventually open its doors. What no one could see was that behind the glitter lived a man still running from wounds he never learned how to face. Long before fame arrived, Brian's story began with absence. He was born in Scotland in 1945, into uncertainty from his very first breath. His mother was young, overwhelmed, and alone. Within days of his birth, she left him at a hospital. There was no explanation, no goodbye, no name written down for his father. That missing truth became the first silence Brian learned to live with. As he grew older, that silence followed him like a shadow. It shaped his hunger to be seen, to be heard, to be wanted. When answers never came from home, he learned to search for validation elsewhere. From crowds, from applause, from strangers who cheered his name without knowing the boy who still wondered why he had been left behind. Brian was taken in by foster parents who gave him stability and warmth. They tried to give him a sense of belonging, but even kindness couldn't erase the feeling that everything was temporary. As a child, he learned how fragile love could be, that people could disappear without warning, that safety could be taken away. Music became his refuge. Singing was the one place where he felt complete. When he sang, he wasn't abandoned. He wasn't invisible. He existed loudly and confidently in a way the rest of his life never allowed. Even as a boy, his voice stood out. It wasn't polished or trained, but it carried emotion that made people stop and listen. Family gatherings turned into performances. Small rooms felt like stages. Every note felt like proof that he mattered. Childhood, however, was never gentle with him. Illness struck early, and there were moments when doctors weren't certain he would fully recover. That early brush with mortality planted something deep inside him. A need to live fast. A need to feel everything intensely, a fear of wasting time being quiet or small. By the time Brian reached his teenage years, Scotland began to feel too tight for the dreams growing inside him. London called like a promise. The city was alive with ambition, competition, and music spilling out of every basement club. Brian arrived with confidence, masking insecurity, talent, masking fear. He joined bands. He left bands. He failed publicly. He learned quickly. Each rejection toughened him. Each small win convinced him he was getting closer. He wasn't just learning how to sing. He was learning how to survive an industry that rarely cared who you were. Once the spotlight moved on, through early bands and late nights, Brian crossed paths with musicians who shared his hunger and restlessness. Among them were players just as determined to escape obscurity. When he joined a new group that would eventually become known as Sweet, it felt like fate finally aligning. But success didn't come overnight. The band struggled. They reshaped their sound. They followed producers who promised hits. There were compromises that felt uncomfortable. Images that felt artificial. When the music finally clicked, it exploded. the early 1970s turned sweet into glam rock royalty. Chart-topping singles, television appearances, screaming fans, Brian became a recognizable face almost overnight. His voice cut through the noise with charm and confidence. On stage, he was fearless. Off stage, the pressure was relentless. Tour dates blurred together. Interviews never stopped. Expectations grew heavier with every hit. The image he projected felt effortless, but maintaining it was exhausting. Fame didn't erase his old wounds. It amplified them. Applause filled arenas, but quiet moments haunted him. The fear that love was conditional never left, that once the song stopped, people would disappear again. Drinking began casually, the way it did for many musicians of that era. A way to relax, a way to celebrate, a way to take the edge off. Slowly, it became a shield, a way to silence the doubts that never stopped whispering. Alcohol didn't create the pain, it simply made it easier to ignore. Then came the night that shattered everything. In 1974, after what should have been an ordinary evening, violence found him without warning. A confrontation outside a club turned brutal. Kicks, blows, a direct attack on his throat. For a singer, it was catastrophic. The injury nearly destroyed his voice. Doctors weren't sure he would ever sing again. For Brian, it felt like losing his identity. The one thing that had always saved him was suddenly gone. Recovery was slow and painful. Therapy sessions pushed his damaged voice beyond comfort. Notes that once flowed freely now required effort and strain. When he returned to performing, audiences cheered, but something had changed. His voice carried tension where power once lived. Producers noticed, bandmates noticed, the industry noticed. Inside the band, dynamics shifted. Creative control became a battlefield. Brian, once the undeniable focal point, now felt vulnerable and defensive. Arguments replaced camaraderie. Frustration bled into rehearsals. Alcohol became less of a release and more of a dependency. Missed cues, unreliable performances, strained relationships. By the late 1970s, the cracks were impossible to hide. Brian left Sweet, officially citing health reasons. Unofficially, it was exhaustion, resentment, and heartbreak. Leaving the band didn't free him. It stripped him of the structure that had kept him upright. Without the platform that defined him, he struggled to find his footing. Solo projects failed to gain momentum. The industry moved on, as it always does. New sounds, new faces. Nostalgia replaced excitement. Brian's life shrank. Smaller venues replaced arenas. Drinking intensified. Health declined. Financial problems followed. Legal disputes drained what little stability remained. By the 1990s, the fantasy people remembered no longer matched reality. He lived modestly, far from the spotlight, performing wherever he could. His body bore the cost of decades of abuse and injury. His voice, once unstoppable, struggled to carry him through songs that once defined a generation. Still, he performed because the stage was the last place he felt real. Fans who saw him in those later years didn't see a fallen star. They saw a survivor, a man refusing to disappear quietly. Even when his health failed, he smiled for photographs, signed autographs with shaking hands, thanked people for remembering him. In private, those closest to him saw the truth, the cost of unresolved trauma, the damage of untreated addiction, the cruelty of an industry that celebrates talent but abandons vulnerability. In his final years, Brian's body began to fail completely. Heart problems, organ failure, hospital visits became routine. He rarely complained publicly. Pride kept him silent. Humor masked the pain. But the weight of everything he had carried since childhood finally caught up to him. Brian Connolly died in 1997 at just 51 years old. Far too young, far removed from the heights he once knew. Fans remembered the golden-haired frontman frozen in old television clips. Only later did the full story emerge. The abandonment, the injury, the addiction. The slow erosion of everything he built. Brian Connolly didn't just lose fame, he lost the safety it gave him. His story is not about failure, it's about what happens when unresolved wounds meet sudden success, when applause replaces healing, when talent is celebrated, but pain is ignored. He gave the world music that still lives decades later, and in return, the world never quite learned how to hold the man behind the voice.